And welcome on stage, Albert Kinney.
Great, thank you very much. So you don't know me, and that's probably a good thing. With a background in military, intelligence, research and development, I have a particular set of skills, and I've created teams that are known as the Advanced Persistent Threat. I'm here to talk to you today about strategies that pertain to the Advanced Persistent Threat that you can employ in your enterprise as well. I think it's important that we start to think like the bad guy and do what we can to meet the threat where they are and to understand how they are weak so that we can combat them. This slide represents what we're seeing today. The whole picture is coming together. We've moved from a convenience state in IT to a dependence state in IT. We can't do without it, and the processes that we run in our businesses and our governments are dependent upon critical infrastructures, including information technology. The bad guys know this. The bad guys are taking advantage of this. And the bad guys are watching everything we do in every layer of the stack, from technology all the way through the regulatory environment, and they use each one of those against you. So let's look at this operational view of attack and defense. Really, it's the same for either side. You jump into the OODA loop here, you orient yourself, you observe, you make decisions, and ultimately you're trying to reduce risk. The bad guy is trying to reduce risk as well. He doesn't want to get thrown out of his really great spot where he's stealing all of your data or your intellectual property or your finances. Doesn't want to get thrown out. There's a risk there, a business risk for most of these guys, or a risk of losing their tools, a risk of embarrassment within their community. And for you, as a defender, there's obviously a lot of risk every move you make. You have to consider what's happening on the network, what am I seeing, what opportunities do I have to install new things, change things, reconfigure things. What will happen if I do any of those things? I can't break my own network with these changes. So I'm going to have to make sure I'm resilient to upgrades as well as being resilient to attacks. I'm going to basically have to manage my workflows on a daily basis and make sure I'm providing the service I guaranteed to my customers while at the same time responding to this other ongoing competition. So the forensic detail is important. Forensic detail meaning everything from what malware is on my system all the way through what are the changes that I made yesterday and how do they affect the applications that I have running today. Ultimately, we're trying to avoid risk or reduce risk or transfer that risk to somebody else. And the bad guys are doing the same thing there too, and we have to figure out how to intercept this loop and cause them problems. None of this is going to make us 100% secure. I think we all know that. But can we make it more costly for the bad guy? Can we cause them more difficulty? Can we cause them to become disinterested in us and become interested somewhere else? Can we cause them to lose their investment or their backing of whoever's asking them to do this work? So I want to introduce some of the axioms of cyber warfare. These are things that we've learned from acting in the APT space and watching the ATP space, and we think that these are good strategies that you can apply also on the defensive side. First of all, cyber warfare is an access-driven phenomenon. You can't have cyber warfare without access to cyberspace. So how can I remove the access from the bad guy? Well, they try to access every aspect of the stack. And we think about technology stacks and buffer overflows and all that kind of access, but the people stack is actually a place where they're very interested because it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier, frankly, to access that stack. Can we also do that from the defensive side? Sure. Why can't we go to the same conferences they go to? Why can't we have the same friends they have? Why can't we talk to the same experts they talk to and understand what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, and when they're thinking about doing it? We can extend our security perimeter outside of our network all the way into their network. And it's really just the same thing they're trying to do to us. Cyber warfare is mission-centric. These guys that do this in a real way, that are backed up by governments, they don't do this as a hobby. They don't run out there and say, what do you think we want to do today? They have a plan. They have a big plan. And it's going to be engineered to to win. So they don't stop at the first defense and say, well, let's pack up and go home. They have one defense. No, they figure out how to go around that defense. And we've talked about back doors. There are front doors through people. There's all kinds of ways to get involved in this. And they avoid, the experts in this area avoid event-driven solutions. In other words, they don't wait for a vulnerability to come on the scene and say, now, finally, I can go after the information I've been seeking. No, they engineer that vulnerability in. And they focus on making sure that they can continue doing their mission regardless of what you do in defense. These are all the same concepts we need to provide our networks to protect against them. So how can we disrupt them? How can we stop them in this area? And how can we kick them out? We have to understand that there's a multiple use nature of everything we do in IT. All the good stuff that we have in IT are potentially bad things too, given the wrong attitude or in the wrong hands. Something like a network sniffer, which is great for troubleshooting your performance problems, is of course a great tool for listening in on the network as well. And there are many others. We have to understand what these tools are and be able to use them to their advanced capabilities. It's not rocket science, it's exactly what those guys are doing to us. And it involves not only technology, but also the people involved. Are you using your people to the best end? Are you allowing them to be creative in your network? Because I can tell you the adversary is certainly allowing their people to be as creative as possible. We talk about sensors. As a weapon, we talk about sensors, but we have all kinds of sensors in our network. We just don't understand how to employ them in a warfare-like manner, because those sensors can really help us ferret out who's in our network and what they're doing. But it's important to then have the analysts to handle that as well. And of course, these sensors can be easily connected and created into weapons, really just given an option on a command line or an extra click to make a sensor into a weapon. These are things that the adversary understands, but it's also a way for us to understand how to find and remove that adversary from our own enterprise. It's a matter of understanding all the tools that we have. This one is one of my favorites, the intertwined technical relationship between this attacker and the enterprise. So the advanced persistent threat is persistent. They have to focus on being persistent. And in that mode, they have to live with their target. They're intertwined. The dependency of their attack is the health of the attacked environment. And so they want a stable environment. They want an environment that's going to be the same tomorrow as it was when they broke in today. Right there is a big clue on the defense, how we need to change things for them, how we need to make them come alive and have to redo the work they've done before. We need to use our sensors to find them when they start making these changes. The fact is, a lot of these advanced persistent threat actors will be in the network for a long time, and the way that they stay in that network for all those years is by effectively maintaining your network for you in some cases, to make sure it's stable, to make sure that it's patched, to make sure that you don't run patches. Instead, they run patches for you so that it looks like everything's fine. That's the kind of thing we need to watch out for, and we need to also make sure that we're ahead of them in all of these areas. So resilience, as much as it's important to us, is also important to the attacker in these ways. Now, policy is part of the problem and the solution here. We talk about having strong policies in our networks, whether they be technical policies or all the way up through national policies. Well, the adversary has policies as well, and they know how to use policies against us. So, for instance, the idea of boldness as a warfare concept, our adversaries, they have no problem with boldness. But on the defensive side, we have a problem with boldness because we don't have good policies, we don't have good law about how to counterattack or what kinds of defenses you can do or what kind of exposure you can make. Even in the area of a honey net, there are policies that are really a detriment to the defense of your network when in fact the adversary, of course, has a free and open policy about what they would do. That pushes us to the idea of compliance. Some of us have been exposed to networks where we are led to believe that compliance with a set of rules in a security realm is going to make us more secure. And in fact, we all know that it's not necessarily more secure. It's a nice foundation, but not necessarily more secure. And if you were to say, well, I want to use this network as a maneuver platform to try to expose the bad guy who's living in this network by changing the configuration of my network. Right off the bat, your security person is more than likely to say, if you make that change, you're going to be out of compliance and the network is not certified for operation anymore. That's a true answer in the context of a regulatory environment, but it's not relevant in the context of a battle against an enemy. So we have to really open our idea of what maneuver might be and how much compliance really matters when you're faced with an ongoing attack. Then we have a battle internally about privacy and sense making. If we really want to sense our networks, we're going to have to understand the information in those networks. And we do value privacy as well, but there has to be a balance. And so you start to look at your network, you start to look at your corporate network, and you start to look at perhaps your national network, and you have to say, at what point have I over-provided for privacy and under-provided for sensing? And does that make me more vulnerable? In the adversary space, they don't really care about your privacy. They care a little bit about their own so they can maintain their position. But they use sensors to watch over their own shoulder to make sure that you're not coming after them. And so the use of sensors as a maneuver element is important to them. It should be important to us, and we should perhaps open these policies because our adversaries read our policies, and they do know where our constraints are and where they can leverage them. We need to understand higher order effects. An adversary does understand the higher order effects of what they might do. They might get out there and do an offensive action and find out that by doing a denial of service, they may have denied the service to themselves in terms of returning command and control calls from a botnet field or any other kind of information flow. So they're careful not to cause blowback into their own systems. On the defensive side, we need to think about that as well. As you know, we can't just say, oh, there's an attack going on, let's run out and pull the plug on everything. Of course, you would never do that. So the blowback idea is important. We have to be able, though, to have a little bit more precision in understanding what blowback might be and being willing to take some risk in terms of, well, I could stand some of this blowback for a couple hours if it was helping me solve a problem that I'm facing. And right now, of course, our environment is one where we would say we have absolutely no tolerance for this blowback of any kind. That needs to change if we're going to operate in the way that the bad guy operates and combat against him. That brings us to standardization and compliance. So standardization has been touted as a path toward a secure network. Now, as the bad guy, complexity in the network is my friend, but standardization is the love of my life. All I need to know is what your standard is. I just need to know which components you buy in bulk and how you configure them according to your regulatory environment, how you maintain compliance, and now I know the narrow line of technologies that I have to invest in as the advanced persistent threat. And I can count on you to follow your policies, so I don't have to worry about the odd Linux box showing up when you're a pure Windows environment. I don't have to worry about the open source software when you're a commercial-only, commercial off-the-shelf kind of organization. And so for me, it's cheaper. Thank you very much. And I can work hard on those components that you do invest in, knowing that you're not going to throw them away in the future. I work hard on those components, and I'm able to have skill in those areas, very specialized areas. And then I'm able to maintain persistence because I've built a workforce, an ecosystem, and you're not going to change because you have a compliance policy that says standardization is a path toward security. Now, I don't want to completely throw standardization out because security management is hard, especially when you have a highly diverse environment. But we need to make room for times when diverse technologies might help us change the ecosystem, change the topology, and make it more difficult for this adversary to maintain their position. And this is all about an ongoing warfare activity. We're never going to stop, do something, and be secure. We're going to have to continue to maneuver, continue to sense, continue to play this game, and conduct warfare against any adversary that comes along. I use the word warfare a little bit lightly, but really it's the attitude that we want to evoke here, whether you're dealing with criminals, whether you're dealing with actual warfare, or you're dealing with some sort of espionage. So we realize then that cyber platforms are maneuverable platforms. Now think about this. Suppose you were driving a ship, a Navy ship, and you were going to be driving around the ocean in the area where your adversaries were. You would never say, well, I'm going to anchor this ship right here in front of my adversary's homeland, and I'm just going to let them watch me, look at me, put the radar out, fly over the top for as long as they want, months on end. I'm just going to stay here. I wouldn't do that. I certainly wouldn't feel secure doing it, and I would feel very vulnerable, in fact, doing it. And yet, through a compliance state of mind, that's effectively what we're doing with our networks, is saying, you know, I want the strongest static network I can find, and then I'm going to set it out there in front of the adversary and let them study it for years and years and years. And since I'm in compliance, I feel good about being safe and protected. So I would advocate, again, diversity, maneuverability, a certain degree of compliance, some standards, but the ability to make choices and change configurations so you can use, in a smart way, adversary warfare tactics against them. So ultimately, you want to confuse the adversary, complicate their decision space. It does a couple of things. First of all, that costs them some time, some money, but it also causes them to maneuver as well. They either have to go home or they have to maneuver and try to still play. When they do that, that's when we find them. We don't very easily find them when they're static and just kind of laying around the network. We find them when they're trying to maneuver and establish new footholds. We find them when they're shifting information. We find them when they're trying to call home and they can't find where home is because it isn't where it used to be. That's when we have the opportunity to use our sensing networks to find them, hunt them down, and get them out of the network, impute attribution, and move through the entire process of the stack really to a legal end. This type of attitude in our networks provides mission assurance for what we're doing. So if your mission is business, manufacturing, making money, investments, you want to be assured that you're able to do that. We've moved again from a society that thought computers were nice to have and made things a little bit easier to a society that's dependent upon having a network, a society that can't operate very well at all in the absence of a network. So we ought to really consider the IT portion of our network to be a mission assurance issue. All right, so going back to the cycle of operations, we have a prevent, detect, respond kind of cycle that we have to live in constantly. And too many of our organizations today, they live in the prevent and the detect portion of the cycle, but they're not very good at the respond function. And they're waiting for something big to happen so that they can call in a specialized response team who they've never worked with before and launch them in to finish this problem, and everybody lives happily ever after, and they go back to the prevent portion of the cycle and they try to live there again for a long period of time. What we're failing to realize is this is a flow, a constant flow. In fact, you have to exist really in any large enterprise in all three phases of the flow. And you have to have teams and relationships with other organizations that constantly give you intelligence, give you understanding about your network, how your network interfaces with other networks logically near you, and how your network and those networks are interfaced to the rest of the world. What are the threats that are developing, and what are the attitudes that are developing? Why would somebody come against you? And who are the technical players you're going to call in when you do have to get in the respond portion? The best case scenario here is to have the minimum required response constantly. You're always living in response, but you never have a major response because you've always got resilience built in. You've always done your patching, you've always done your backups, you've always done your forensic analysis, you've always done many responses at the same time improving, improving, improving. It's a maneuver idea rather than a static defense. Maneuver defense is better than a static defense. So if we can achieve that, then we really can start to move up the maturity model here. Moving up from the bottom, we find a lot of our clients are not having much of a problem at the bottom of the maturity cycle here. They understand what's on their network. They're able to see what's on their network. They know how many pieces and parts they have. And they're able to do compliance fairly well. Compliance to 100% standard is still difficult, but compliance in general remains achievable. So they've understood the posture of their network, and they're able to enumerate and visualize what's going on in the network. Now, in the middle here, at the cognizance level, many of our clients are sort of almost there. They've got security operations centers, but many of the security operations centers don't consider sensing, don't consider maneuver. They really consider monitoring of compliance. A necessary function, but not a sufficient function for security. So we change here. We're trying to move from a compliance attitude to a risk-focused attitude. How can we adjust risk? How can we accept risk? And how can we make sure that we have the appropriate amount of risk in our networks, knowing that we'll never have the resources to fully invest to solve the risk problem 100%. So this is a matter of tying your security and your IT assets to the mission or business outcomes that you're involved in. Again, if you don't understand your mission or your business, you won't be able to protect it appropriately. You'll spread security across the whole mission, across the whole business, without consideration for what's most important. That's a very hard problem, though. Most of our companies don't know what server necessarily controls what process in the business sense. And the languages, of course, don't translate necessarily from the IT folks to the business folks. So that's something we need to work on. But once we get past that bridge right there, that bridge from cognizance to situational awareness, there's lots of opportunities for automated analysis, for a larger understanding of a complex enterprise that will help us diffuse information and bring us to effectively what would be a command and control relationship from our network to our business. In the future, this is how we're going to have to operate, knowing that the threats aren't going away. We can't put enough people in jail to stop them. That wouldn't work. We can't be compliant enough with standards of security compliance because they just change constantly. We're going to have to engage. And by engaging, that means we're ultimately going to need a command and control kind of perspective. So this is the strategy moving forward, knowing that the world is what it is. We can't stop using IT. We're dependent upon it, and we enjoy the outcomes that we get from it. So there's no case to make for stopping it and going backwards. But the case to make is we have to participate in the world that we live in. All of us buy cars. We buy the best cars we can find for the price that we can afford, and we hope that they're safe, and we've read about how safe they might be and make sure they have the best equipment. No matter what car you buy, you still have to get out on the road. You're going to have to deal with weather on the road. You're going to have to deal with people like me driving on the road. And no matter what car you have, it's going to be different in every case. So you have to maneuver to make sure that you protect what's valuable to you. It's the same thing that we have to do in cyberspace. We have to understand what's valuable to us, take appropriate actions, and we have to live in the environment and know that it's a constant flow of protection, of compliance, and an understanding of what's going on. If we do that, we'll be able to ultimately win as a collective group against the bad guys, but we won't be able to stop doing it. We're in this game forever. Thank you.